Hello and welcome to The Great Creators. I'm Guy Raz. This is a show where I talk to some of the most celebrated actors, musicians, and performers of our time about creativity. And our guest today is Ike Barinholtz, comedian, actor, screenwriter, director, you name it. Ike Barinholtz is one of those actors who you see in a movie and you're like, I've seen him in everything. And even though he's not always the star, he's been a pretty important part of the comedy scene since the early 2000s. He's had supporting roles in tons of comedies like The Mindy Project, Neighbors, Blockers, Sisters, and The After Party. Ike got his start, actually, in his early 20s in Chicago. He was doing stand-up and improv, and he quickly ended up getting a role on Mad TV. But after some early struggles to land more roles, he realized that he might not be cut out to be an actor, so he started to pursue screenwriting. Anyway, in this episode, you will learn how Ike worked as a busboy at Second City, where he learned from legends like Tina Fey and Seth Meyers and Jordan Peele and Rachel Dratch. He talks about moving to L.A., hoping to make it big and failing hard really fast. He couldn't even get a part as an onion in a Quiznos commercial at one point. You'll also hear how he got cast on Mad TV, how he had 5 years of incredible success, only to be told that they weren't renewing his contract, and how after a long and painful stretch without a whole lot of work, he decided to pivot to screenwriting, which opened the door to a collaboration with Mindy Kaling, which eventually revived his career. So what you need to know going into the story is that for the past several decades, Chicago is where some of the greatest comedians in the world got their start. Stephen Colbert, Seth Meyers, Tina Fey, Jason Sudeikis, Rachel Dratch, so many others who we know today started doing stand-up and improv at places like Second City and The Annoyance. And Ike Barinholtz, he grew up in that world in Chicago and, of course, eventually worked at some of these places. But early on, comedy wasn't really his focus. He never thought he would become a comedian or an actor. In fact, he wanted to be a politician.
You know, it's funny, growing up in Chicago at that time, the people you looked up to, at least I did, were athletes, Chicago Cubs specifically. This was even like pre-Michael Jordan when I first got
Yeah, you grew up. This is when the Bears went to the Super Bowl.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah,
this is a great time. You had Ryan
great
Sandberg
time.
on the Cubs.
Oh, Rhino, Leon Durham, just a great time to be a kid in Chicago. And my father was friends with some kind of local politicians. One guy in particular was a committeeman of the 46th Ward. And so on election day, we would go out, we would go to stop by the campaign offices. And I was struck by two things. I was struck by, A, how politicians talk and how what they are selling you, whether or not they're being honest, is irrelevant. What they're trying to tell people is they want to help them. And watching the reaction between a politician and a voter, I just was I thought it looked cool and you could help people maybe. And the other thing was the food at the campaign offices. It was just people were bringing by donuts. They were bringing by all kinds of like Polish pastries and stuff. And I just remember like, wow, you get to like help people and it's cool and there's great food. There was one guy I remember in particular, a guy named Zenkich, who was running for, I have no idea, some office in the north side of Chicago. And he had a big, slick back, hair-sprayed hair like the guys did back in the 80s. And he was handing out combs that had his name on it. And I remember he gave me a comb and he looked at me and he said, "Whenever you comb your hair, you will think of Zenkich." And I kind of still do almost. It's
You
really
still
a
do
big
when you comb your
memory.
hair.
I mean, whenever I'm getting it back there and I'm getting the pompadour a little bit up, I'm like, Zenkich. But anyways, it was just very intoxicating. And I just kind of was thinking, oh man, I would love to do that. Be a senator from Illinois. Can you imagine how much fun that would be? Or the mayor of Chicago. And so that was kind of what I always thought where I thought I would end up.
I mean, there's an element. There are parallels, right? There's an element of performance in politics for sure. But you didn't grow up in we've had people on the show who are children of actors or who got into theater at age 5 and were the stars of their high school drama programs. You were not any of that, right?
No. no. I
No, not even the drama program in high school.
Not even. I mean, I did like. I remember when I was a junior, I was like, I'm gonna audition for the play. What the heck? It was Wizard of Oz, and I was like, yeah, my friends are doing it. It'll be fun. And I remember I worked really hard on the audition. I auditioned to play the lion, and I got cast as Uncle Henry, which everyone
That's
agrees
that's a small role.
it's the worst part in the whole play. He's pretty much worthless. He has one or two lines like, Dorothy, we were worried about you. And I remember, oh man, this is awful. I spent all night working on this audition. I came in, I sang in front of people, and then they're like, you're going to be the loser uncle. So I wasn't feeling that was where I was going to end up. But I also did my like thing I loved doing was watching movies. Like I loved watching movies and TV shows, especially with my friends. We were not cool guys in high school. Instead of, some cool guys would go to parties and, go on dates. We would just like go to each other's house and just watch like 3 movies. And so I loved that world. I would read books about it, but I didn't quite see myself moving into it until I was like late in my teens.
Yeah. And I mean, the 80s and early 90s, when you kind of grew up in Chicago, I mean, that was a golden era of Chicago movies, John Hughes movies particularly.
John Hughes movies, but there's a couple some great action movies from the 80s. There's a truly great cop movie called Running Scared with Gregory Hines and Billy Crystal. They're two Chicago cops, and they're fighting Jimmy Smits, who's like a crime lord, and like Joe Pantoliano's in it, and really a great movie. Code of Silence is a Chuck Norris movie. That's actually probably the only good Chuck Norris movie.
Missed that one.
Yeah, and then there is, I think it might be Kiss in the 90s, but there's a great movie called The Package with Gene Hackman and Tommy Lee Jones. I mean, like 2 of my favorite actors ever, and that's another great Chicago movie. But it was just, it was a very fun time to grow up there. Like it was just a good place, and it was cool. And then the Bulls came in the 90s, and it was just very wonderful, blessed early life.
They owned the 90s, right? I mean,
oh yeah.
And as a high school kid, would you have been described as like funny or the class clown or like a guy who's always telling jokes? Like, do you think kids would have described you that way?
Yeah, yes, I would say so. I mean, it's so funny. All my friends, we were all clowns. You know what I mean? All the guys, all the girls, everyone was just constantly laughing. But I would say I was the one who would have the funny response to the speaker in the assembly. Or I was the one when we had to come up with a senior prank that would be like, oh, what if we just, got a bunch of chickens and let them loose in the school? So I would say that when my high school classmates found out I was going into comedy, that none of them were surprised, I would say.
Yeah.
But everyone's funny when you're a kid. You know what I mean? Like everyone is so funny.
Yes.
Like your friends are just the funniest people in the world.
You went off to Boston University. I mean, with no intention of again doing theater or drama or acting or comedy, and you lasted a year. You dropped out. What happened?
I went to BU, and I think I went in knowing that it might not last, just because first of all, I was not in like BU has like the College of Liberal Arts. It has the engineering school, journalism school, I think. But then if you had like decent boards and like bad grades, they had this thing called CGS, which was like you do a year or 2 in this, and then you get to finish the last 2 years of whatever college you want. So I wasn't in a great program, but that didn't really matter. Even if I was in one of the other programs, I got there, and I think first of all, just like the freedom kind of overtook me a little bit. The freedom to do whatever you want. Not that my parents were strict, but just like it was the first time where I was like, yeah, I could go to class, or I could watch 4 movies today. And there's more often than not, I would choose that. It was the first time I was trying new things. You know what I mean? So it just, I think probably a couple months in there, I, at least in my head, came to the realization that like, I was not coming back here. And which meant that the door for politics was probably closed. But I knew there was
Not
something else.
necessarily. I mean, there's plenty of.
Well, now, yeah.
I mean, look at Congress today.
Oh my God! Please, I would be the president pro tempore of the Senate right now, compared to some of these folks. But I think back then, it was very much kind of like you had to kind of do the 4-year college, and you had
Yeah.
to, and so
Sure.
I think I was probably bummed. My parents were certainly bummed. I wasn't very forthright with them about what was happening, and so then I came back to Chicago after Boston. I was like, I'm going to come back to Chicago, and I knew that I had some kind of showbiz bug coming back from BU.
Really?
A little bit, just because some of the movies I was watching, and specifically some of the TV shows I was watching, really kind of blew me away. In particular, it's so funny. I remember this one night we were at someone's dorm and they had cable and they had HBO. And it was the first episode of Mr. Show, which I don't know if you've seen Mr. Show with Bob Odenkirk and David Cross. Like, it's, arguably the best sketch show ever. And it blew me away. Like, I couldn't believe there could be things that funny. And it felt also like it was stuff that it was like ideas and stuff that I was like, I could do that, So that was that was an early thing where I was like, oh, comedy. I saw Jon Stewart do stand up, and even though I didn't want to do stand up, just like being in a live room with comedy, and it was really coming back to Chicago, and my dad randomly had a friend whose brother was this kind of big improviser in Chicago. And he was like, hey, I'm going to take you to this theater's, I think it was the Improv Olympics 10th anniversary. And
Improv Olympics.
Improv Olympic,
Right.
yeah.
Yep.
And I went, and that was it. That was like the moment
That
where
show.
I was like, that specific show, the specific line from Tim Meadows that made me laugh so hard that I was like, I want to be doing this. Like, these are just.
Do you remember who, besides Tim Meadows, who was in that show that you saw?
Yeah, Amy Poehler, Adam McKay. I mean, just all these legends. Kevin Dorff. I think Tina Fey was there. Chris Farley had sent in a video because he was still on SNL. It was just like,
Wow.
It was just incredible. And that
This is like 96, so this is before obviously these people were hugely famous. They were improv actors.
They were improv actors, and we went to high school right down the street from Second City, so we would see them. We would go to Mr. G's and get hot dogs, and we would see, like, we didn't know who they were, but it was Chris Farley and Tim Meadows, like, early on before they even went to SNL. And so going and seeing these people do this art form that I had really never seen before, it just felt like it could be accessible to me, and I was laughing so hard that I was like, I want to do this.
Because you were, I mean, from what I understand, when you dropped out of college, like, to make money, you got a job working for the transit authority, like a desk job, right?
Desk job, yeah. I worked for the CTA, an offshoot of the marketing department called Quality Management, which I always loved that name. Sounds like a real mob thing. Yeah, I work in quality management. Don't worry about it. But it was, I would do that during the day. And then at night, I was taking classes for a year. This time in Chicago, by the way, this was like such a cool time because the improv scene was really exploding, and there were 3 theaters. You had Second City, you had the Improv Olympic, you had the Annoyance Theater. You had so many, like, thousands of people were coming to Chicago to take part in this kind of this movement, kind of. And so I would take classes, and then I would start performing, and it was getting tough doing the desk job. And that, like, it's tough to go and do a show at like 9 o'clock. Afterwards, everyone's drinking beers, hanging out, getting up at like 6 a.m., getting on the subway, getting there by like 7:30 was tough. There was a lot of naps. I kept getting busted for napping. I remember one day, my boss said, hey, if you fall asleep again, you're in huge trouble. Because I was doing this thing at my desk, like that. And I just was so tired one morning. I knew we had a little supply closet that had a bunch of maps, like boxes and boxes of maps. And I just got in there and propped myself up on those boxes and shut my eyes. And the next thing I remember, my manager, who was a great guy, by the way, the nicest guy, Tom, was like shaking me. And he was like, "Wake up." And I had been there for a couple hours, and I got in big trouble. So it was definitely, it was fun, but tough.
What do you think it is about Chicago that was like this, this fertile soil for all these improv troupes? I mean, obviously there was improv in New York and L.A., which you would expect, right? You would expect L.A. to be the center of improv, and New York too, because of the theater scene there. But Chicago was a powerhouse. Is what explains that in your mind?
I mean, well, first of all, overall, I think Chicagoans have a very good sense of humor. I think they enjoy people making fun of people, and they love people making fun of them. Like they love to be like they love it. They just love they just thick skin. They just love it. I think probably though the reason it ended up being a bit of an epicenter is probably just because of Second City. I feel like if Bernie Solins and those guys and Joyce in whenever 1965 whatever were like, what if we just did this in Kansas City? I imagine Kansas City might be a bigger hub, but I think because they were there and Second City became such a big part of Chicago, and there were just certain individuals I think too, like Del Close being one of the kind of early Second City guys and staying in Chicago and then linking up with Sharna and opening the IO. You know what I mean? So it just kind of, it was pretty organic, but it was fun. Oh my God. You go to the Annoyance Theater and just see like crazy renegade comedy shows. It was a very, very, very fun time.
I mean, and as you mentioned, I mean, this is like you're saying Tina Fey and Rachel Dratch and Jason Sudeikis and like Jordan Peele, like all these people who are legends now, like Amy Poehler. You just see them on stage.
Well, I was a busboy at Second City, and this is like in 96, 97. And yeah, Tina Fey and Rachel Dratch were both on the main stage. And then in the other theater, it was Brian Stack and Jerry Minor and Neil Flynn and Miriam Tolan and like Horatio. It was just like so many. And then like Chris Farley would come to see his brother do the Turco show, and he would do the improv set, and Mike Myers would be in town. It was just it was crazy. And then I was kind of part of that, I don't know, maybe second or third wave where it was kind of guys coming in like Sudeikis. I remember the first day he showed up, and Jack McBrayer and Seth Meyers and Liz Kukowski. Just a lot of just amazingly funny people. A lot of whom we all still work together these days.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So when you start taking classes, right? How was it? I mean, this is a skill. Like it's like improv is. It's a skill, but also you have to like really work at it because it like tests your brain. You've got to work and think quickly. So how did you, like, what do you remember about just starting out?
I remember those early classes. I remember being not good at first. I remember being every character every time I would get into a scene, just kind of like aggro, kind of like not frat boy, but just kind of like, the authority figure. And there's a phrase called, "Oh, you're in your head." On stage, I was in my head. I wasn't present at the moment and stuff. And I found I was really kind of, even though I would have moments where I was like, oh, I was funny, I got a laugh from the teacher or the class, I would have other moments where I'm on stage thinking too much. And it really was kind of, I think, like when I went to the Annoyance Theater, there's a guy named Mick Napier who ran that theater. And his whole thing was just like embracing your failure and reveling in your failure almost. Like you're going to fail a lot when you do this. And the only way to do it is not think about it so much. And that a couple months with him really got me out of my head. And I remember when I first got, you would take classes for a while. And then when they deemed you were socially acceptable to present to an audience, they would put you on some kind of group.
Put you on stage, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember getting put on a team, and I remember inviting like my parents and bunch of my friends who were in town, and like probably 30, 40 people came to this first show that I did. And it was really bad. It was just like bad. It was not funny and sweaty and blue and just not pleasant. And I was not great. And I remember afterwards, like seeing some of them being a little worried, a little bit, not worried, not openly, just like being overly nice about the show. You know, yeah, it was crazy. You guys were all standing in line back there. It was so cool. And, you know, I wasn't like worried. I was bummed, wasn't worried. But then maybe 2 shows later, I had a couple friends come back, and I had first really good show where I had a good response. I was connecting with the audience. And once you have that feeling, that's it. You just want to keep doing that. You want to chase that money. You know what I mean? You just want to just feel that feeling constantly.
How did you develop? I mean, it's a long slog, right? To get to a point where finally they're comfortable with you on the stage, and you have to get comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Do you remember how long it took from the time you started taking classes until the time you were actually performing in front of people in an audience?
It probably was, I would say it was probably 6 months before I took my first class and the time we started doing shows. And I would say the first 6 months of shows, with a couple exceptions here and there, I still wasn't completely ready. Like you have to eat S a lot. You know what I mean? You gotta just really get humble and go through scenes where you just don't get laughs to know what it feels like. You gotta bomb a little bit. And I remember, you know, just remember being grouped with a couple of people who I really responded to, and probably a year and a half in is when I started getting really comfortable, when I started kind of, you know, not stressing before the show. And from that point on, I really started developing, I think, as a player. And then they started asking me to do the big, you know, Monday night shows. And then the thing is if you like it and you've learned how to do it, and you do it a lot, like you're gonna get good. You know what I mean? You're gonna start getting more and more confidence.
Yeah, I mean, imagine it's like any kind of exercise, right? Like the more you're doing it, you're just gonna get better and better at it, and over time, it probably became just easier for you to say funny things without even thinking about them.
Yeah, it's having the confidence to know that if you bomb, so what? I think that's what it is. Like, it's just like, I remember I did this show with Jamie Foxx one time, and he flubbed a line live on TV and started just dancing, and like the crowd exploded. And I was like, that's the confidence of a man who has been performing for thousands and thousands of hours, has died early in his career, has gone up on stage at Madison Square Garden. It's just repetition, you know what I mean? And if you're able to get past all the psychological drama of it, and oh man, I wasn't funny, that was bad, like, and not regress and just kind of keep growing, I think, you're not scared. You can walk into any set, you can walk into anything.
It's almost like you have to have that experience of bombing multiple times in order to pull off that Jamie Foxx thing.
100%. I don't think there's anyone in comedy who just is like, I've always killed. It's just weird. I've just, from my first joke, I think you just have to know that, and to know that failure is not like the end of the world. If you're failing nonstop and you're never getting laughs and you're not happy, then yeah, that is a different thing. But just having a bad show, not connecting with an audience, is something that's going to happen to everyone, and it will make you grow. It will.
You decide to move to LA. You're 23. This is 2000. Obviously, because this is where now you've got some experience under your belt, and this is where you have to go to pursue a career in film and television. And when you got there, I mean, you know, how did you start? I mean, how did you did you get an agent? Did you start to go on every audition possible? Like, you know, you're 23 in LA. Like, what do you do?
I'm 23 in LA. You've seen the show Entourage, right? It was just basically like that. Just any episode of Entourage was what I was living at that time. No, I moved out here. I had left Chicago and I did 2 years at this theater in Amsterdam called Boom Chicago, which was like a second city in Amsterdam, which was like rock and roll. You know what I mean? It was like you're doing a show every night in front of hundreds of people, and it's like a big deal. And you're almost like a celebrity. You're like a known comedy person in Amsterdam, and great people's like Seth Meyers, his brother, Sudeikis, Jordan Peele, all those people.
I even
And
think, by
then
the way, Ted Lasso, the roots of Ted Lasso come from that time.
it's literally Tim, Brendan, and Joe. Like it's the
Yeah.
me and Brendan Hunt and I went to Amsterdam together. We were on the same flight, and I remember him saying like, I'm gonna become a soccer fan." And within like a few months, he was just like knew everything, and to watch these guys parlay that into this just global mega hit of a show.
And Brendan Hunt is a huge soccer fan. I've heard him on podcasts. He knows so much about it, and he
Genius.
really got, like, while he was there in Amsterdam for doing this Boom Chicago improv.
Yeah,
That was really where the roots of what would become Ted Lasso begin.
100%. So that was this incredible environment where you were nurtured and loved, and everyone was great, and you're doing shows with Brendan and all these people. Then you come to LA, and it's just like nothing. It's just like nothing. I moved out with a couple friends, and we had a really bad apartment and zero money. Like I'm talking like, $8 in the checking account. Couldn't even get like a job, like washing dishes at first, So the thought when I first got here, it was just like, oh yeah, an agent is just a million miles away. I remember I did get an audition for Quiznos to be an onion on one of their subs. You know Quiznos,
Okay,
right?
nice. Yeah, sure. Like,
that
I don't eat it often, but I know it.
Not sure that there's still that many around, but you remember they oven toasted their subs. That's like
Oven
that was their
toasted
big
sandwiches.
thing.
Yep.
And they had a commercial that wanted actors to portray various vegetables and meats and cheeses,
Like Fruit of the Loom.
Like Fruit of the Loom, exactly.
But for sandwiches.
But the sandwiches, and then the twist, of course, is once the sandwiches start cooking, you have to start dancing and screaming and doing all kinds of funny stuff. And I auditioned for this, and I got a call back, and I was very excited. And then they went a different direction, and that was my one audition that year. And so that was that was a rough one. That was a rough first year here.
Wow.
Yeah, I still think about it a lot, and I just think I could have really brought something special to that.
To the Onion.
To the Onion, I had whatever. It's fine. I'm over it. It's fine. But yeah, it was tough. It was tough at first. Luckily, I had like my little support network of friends, and we were going to each other's improv shows and one man shows, and it was around that time when Josh Meyers, who's the brother of Seth Meyers, kind of said, "Hey, we should do it like a show together, a 2-man show." And so we wrote a show, and this is back when like literally like every building you walked into in Los Angeles, someone was doing a 1 or 2-man show. Like at this time, like 2001, like just it was the era of just like, can you come to my 1-man show? And so we did like a show, like a little sketch show together, and our friend Nicole Sullivan was on Mad TV, and she told the producers they should see this, and they saw it. And then we got to audition for Mad TV. But that was after like a year. That was after a year and a half of being a busboy and like just nothing going on, and just really being like, did I make the right decision?
And during that year and a half, but it sounds like, you were still productive. You were writing sketch comedy, you were writing your own shows. Even if you only had an audience of 5, you were still writing stuff and doing stuff.
Yes. I have a lot of friends who ask me, hey, they ask for advice. They're moving to LA, and what's the advice? And I think the only advice I can give people is just like, don't be passive. Don't just sit and wait. Even if you're just an actor and that's all you do, you're a brilliant actor. Don't just be like, someone needs to cast me. You know what I mean? Like, show them why. Make a video. You know what I mean? Do something. Write a play. Write a monologue. Do something. It will help you with your craft, but it will also get eyes on you. Someone can possibly see you. Otherwise you're just sitting and waiting. So that's, after a little while of just sitting and waiting and being like, nothing's happening, no one is calling, writing with my friends putting this show on and trying to get a little creative definitely saved us, like 100%. Otherwise, who knows? Like if we never wrote the show, they would never come see it. We'd never get casted on Mad TV, and then it's like, who knows?
When you got that job on Mad TV, I mean that's pretty significant. I mean, you were young, and it was a show that had an audience, and I mean it was on television. So, I mean that's a big deal, right? I mean that was a huge break for you.
Yeah, I was over the moon. I had always wanted to be on Saturday Night Live. Like I remember when I was a kid watching like Eddie Murphy on Saturday Night. Like I loved SNL, and I was hoping to kind of every year SNL has like a big batch of auditions, and I was like, oh, I'll audition for SNL this year. But Mad TV kind of called, and so exciting at first. Like first of all, like to go from bussing tables to like being on a TV show is just like lotto winner. And it was fun. I got to see how a TV show is made. I had no idea. Like I didn't know what a mark was when I got there. I had nothing. And we had great creative people in that show, fantastic writers, some phenomenal cast members, and they were pretty generous, I think, letting me write and bring them ideas. And hey, what if we do this sketch? They were just very nice about it, and so I was thrilled. Like it was very, very, very cool. I was making late night TV money, which meant I could like afford a blazer, you know what I mean? And like I could go to dinner and not have to like check my bank account before I went. So it was pretty nice. And yeah, then eventually, like later years into it, I started getting maybe a little restless.
Yeah. I mean, this was also, I mean, obviously part of the show's taped, but part of it is in front of a live audience.
Yes.
So, so there were, the taped set bits, like you could redo them.
Yep.
But the live stuff, like that's it. You've got to make it work.
Yeah. I loved it. That was a good thing about Boom Chicago, right? Is it's a live theater in front of a lot of people. And you can survive in Chicago, being a performer in Chicago. Just like, I think before I went to Boom Chicago, a lot of times I would kind of be on the sideline, kind of jumping in and making a quick, funny comment, being a little more sarcastic, being a little more guarded, not putting myself out there as much. And Boom Chicago is like, you're going to get out there and you're going to do a improvised rap song about a person in the front row. And again, that whole thing of like, I had multiple times at Boom Chicago where it was the Hindenburg and just like utter devastation. And then I would go out the next night and do well and feel great. So the live of it all at Mad TV was like, that was where I felt like I scored. We're kind of coming in a sketch. And a lot of times I'm playing, like a straight man to like whatever, one of the crazy characters on the show. But I loved the live taping nights. It was really, it was fun. It just, it's, if you work on a TV show, it's very hard to want to work anywhere else ever again, just because it's very fun and it's just a lot of people coming together to do it. And it's great.
Can you describe like the architecture of a bit? Like, for example, if you're on stage and you've got to come up with instantly a rap song about the guy in the front row, like, I mean, is that just coming from nowhere? But I imagine like there is already some kind of scaffolding in your mind about how to build that into something funny quickly.
Yeah. I mean, there are some people who are just, their brains are wired for that specific thing, like Brendan Hunt. Like Brendan was like incredible with improvised music. Was just like, I couldn't believe. First of all, he's like a good singer and he has good pitch and stuff, but his brain is able to do like, multiple freestyle, verses that are brand new about a guy named Joe from Columbus, Ohio, who went to a coffee shop today, So for me, I had to do a little more work for that. When I would go up and do one of these things, I would have little bit of framing in my head. You know what I mean? It's like I know I'm gonna probably rhyme these 4 words at some point in this 8-word thing, and then I'll be sweating so much and be out of breath, and then Brendan can jump in and take over, and then Josh can come in. But it is funny. There are, in terms of improv, I think there are 2 types of players. I think there are players that go on a stage like a completely tabula rasa, and they're just like waiting for someone to initiate what the scene is going to be, and they are flawlessly able to kind of merge into that person's mind. And then there's me, who like just when I walk into a scene, I just lay everything out. Mr. President, I have bad news. The vice president, they have diarrhea. You know what I mean? Like I come in and just lay everything out and just want it to be like a little structured so everyone understands what the games are, and it just makes for a more, in my mind at least, enjoyable. It's easier for me to do a scene that way. I think an audience connects with it better.
When you were on Mad TV, there were some characters that you played and sketches that you were part of that were fans of the show know really well, like the Abercrombie models,
Yes.
or the gay straight guys. That was a famous one. I think you did that with Josh Myers,
Yes.
right? How did you? I mean, obviously there was a team of writers and performers, but it's all mixed. Everyone's involved in everything, and so tell me about some of those characters. You know, how did you think about making them come alive, and were you able to write some of those, their lines and some of those characters?
Yeah, it was just like you said, everyone was kind of doing everything there. And there were a lot of times where you would just sit in a writer's office and just a riff ends up in the table read, and that ends up getting picked. A football thing, which is the sketch with Josh and I, which apparently, like, every gay friend of mine is like, you should know that I have been to a gay club at some point, and that sketch has been playing on the television. It is like it's one of my great joys in my life.
Yeah.
That was a sketch that the writers Brian Adams and John Crane performed at the Groundlings. And I remember they came to us and they were like, or maybe it wasn't John or Brian Adams, and I can't remember who, Mike maybe. And he said, this is a sketch we did. This was like our big killer sketch at the Groundlings, and we would like to give it to you guys. So that was like a big honor. Like,
and it's 2 like kind of macho, big American corn-fed guys watching football, but who would also make out during the football games.
Yeah, it's 2 bros watching a Tampa Bay Bucks game, and after a great play, they just have a full-on makeout session. And they're like, "Whoa, that was weird. Oh, look, the game's on. Yeah." And then they can't stop. So yeah, when they gave it to Josh and I, obviously zero trepidation, but it was just, we were so honored that they would give us this sketch that they probably performed, 200 times at the Groundlings and brought the house down, and they gave it to us. But then there were things like the Abercrombie, which was just like, I think maybe Scott King, I can't remember who wrote it, Mike Hitchcock maybe, just them being just absolute weirdos and correctly identifying that the Abercrombie marketing campaign was, very homoerotic. And
it was all white guys.
It was all white guys with flat ironed hair, and like they would always be wearing like corduroy pants that with no shirt and like a scarf. I remember they asked me to do it, and they were like, "You're going to be shirtless," and I was like, "That's cool. I have a very hairy chest, Ashkenazi Jewish," and they were like, "Do you mind waxing it?" And I went and I got my chest wax, like Steve Carell in The 40-Year-Old Virgin, and it was a huge bummer. But I remember they were like, "We're going to paint abs on you." And I was like, "Oh, great." And they painted them on, but it didn't work because like it would jiggle. Like, you know what I mean? Like if you just paint abs on, if you take a still photo, maybe, but like any movement, you're like, oh, okay, this guy's just got makeup on his stomach. But it took off. And I guess there was a documentary about Abercrombie and Fitch that came out last year. And
there is a very good one. And there are scenes from, yes.
Oh my God. So funny. But
Yeah.
it really was they were very open to whether it was a sketch that Josh Myers and I did in our 2-man show that they bought from us, or sitting in an office with like Stephen Cragg and Jennifer Joyce, or just, yeah, having them give you one of their old sketches. It was really, I was really lucky to be with like really, really nice people. You know, I always wish that I was like, I wish the show, it's the better of the sketch. It was one of those things where you have the table read and there's like some sketches that you just have to do. You know what I mean? Because you have a guest coming or something. And then there were sketches that were so funny at the table read that would just kill and they wouldn't get picked. And, you know, being a 24-year-old kid, you're like, oh, come on, that is clearly funnier. But, it was, they were all, the writers were so nice and the cast was just, I'm still friends with a lot of them today. It was a fun gig for a young guy.
You were there for 5 years, and in 2007, you decide to leave, and it was I think it was a tough time for you. What happened? What was the spark that
Well,
that got you?
it's funny. The decision to leave was not mine. It was, my contract was up and I was, it's so funny. I remember being very hopeful that I would get like a good raise. I remember saying to my wife, my girlfriend at the time, like, there's a new deal. Like I'm going to want a lot of money. And, then I remember we went on a trip somewhere and I got the call that they were not re-signing me to a new contract. So it's really one of those moments where you're like, you tell someone this is how much you want and their counter offer is 0. And you're like, oof. So I was pretty bummed for a minute, but I think generally optimistic guy. And this is, what is this, 2007 maybe or so. And this was the normal thing that happened was when you ended on a TV show, you would go and do a pilot. Because everyone was doing pilots. We had so many pilots. Oh my Lord, everyone was doing a pilot season, so many shows. And so I was, I'll just get a pilot somewhere. And I kind of entered this like 3+ year period where I got nothing. Very,
Wow.
very little. Like, I mean, nothing that I was really excited about, nothing that people were loving or even seeing. Just tiny gigs to give me just enough money to pay rent over the course of the next 3 years. And of course, now I'm out here with this woman who I have asked to move to Los Angeles with me, and she moved out to live with a TV guy, and now he's just like a struggling actor. So it was pretty rough. It was a pretty rough time post Mad TV.
Yeah, I read you tested for like more than 20 roles of 25 different shows and nothing. I mean, what was going? I mean, what do you think was going on? I mean, why? I mean, I know you auditioned for a bunch of shows that were, some of which were made. What was your theory about that?
Well, one theory is I wasn't maybe good. Like I wasn't like the performer I am now. I was coming off Mad TV. I wasn't like, maybe that's part of it. Definitely a part of it was, I think at that time, the majority of comedies were not casting guys like me. I like, this is right before you started getting what I think was kind of like the last golden age of network TV comedy, which is like around The Office and 30 Rock and of the like. And before that, the sitcom guys that were getting roles, I think were more just like kind of like just conventionally hot guys, like model-y kind of dudes who were nice guys. I know some of them. But like, I would get to that last level. And I also thought one time too, I was pretty convinced it was because of my teeth. I had very prominent front 2 teeth with a bit of a gap, which now is very trendy according to the internet. But I do think there was just kind of this standard look that dudes had in sitcoms from like 2000 to 2006 that was just not quite me. It just wasn't. It was really The Office and Parks and Rec that was like, okay, we're going to make our comedy stars Aziz and Nick Offerman and Ed Helms, Um, uh, so yeah, I think that was definitely part of it. And it was a huge bummer. It was a huge bummer, and there was definitely moments then when I was like, I'm a little worried. Like I just don't know like what does the future hold? What am I going to be? And I luckily kind of my writing partner has been my best friend Dave Stassen for
Dave
like
Stassen, who you've known
30
since
plus
high
years.
school, I think, or since improv,
Camp.
early improv, right?
No, we went to like day camp together, like
Oh,
Rams Club
right,
Sport Camp when we were like 10.
Wow.
And we had moved out here together and we were going to write. And then I got Mad TV. And then he went to DC to work on Pardon the Interruption. Amazing show. And during that time, I remember we were just talking a lot. And it was like, he's like, maybe I'll come back there. And I was like, yeah, we should just write. Like, we can be a writing team. Let's just do it. We're just going to write. And so he had come back, and it was again, like I fall back on that advice I always tell people is do something when you're here, whatever, just do something. And so because I wasn't getting cast in anything, we would spend all day writing. We would
Just writing.
like just writing. We're gonna like I have an idea for a movie, and we would text each other all night. Well, this happens and this happens, and then just spend 2 weeks just being like, let's write this movie. And we loved it. It was so much fun. And even though we did not have a lot of success with it at first, it felt like movement. It felt like growth. It felt like we were doing something. And it was definitely the key to everything, 100%.
One of the scripts you guys wrote, which wasn't not made, but sounds funny, was about three stoners who decided to kill Osama bin Laden.
Let's get Osama, baby. We could still make it today. I don't see what's preventing us from making it.
And so you would sit down and you would literally write these scripts for a film.
Yes. I early on when I was younger, I don't know how I got a hold of it, but I got Spike Lee's manuscript and director's notes for Do the Right Thing. It was a book. You could buy it. You could probably still buy it. And it broke down kind of how he came up with everything from story to scenes to characters to outfits. And I pored over that book many, many times when I was younger. And I still, to me, like I think like the most exciting thing in showbiz to me is the feeling of having a great idea for whether it's a show, series, or a movie or whatever, having a great idea and becoming obsessed with it for like 2 to 3 nights where you're thinking about it all day, nonstop. You start writing it and it's just pouring out of you. That is like the most fun part. And I've got to do that a lot. Most of them have not sold, but like that feeling is like more exhilarating, I think, than stepping onto a stage, more exhilarating than doing wrapping a movie. Just that feeling of just like, oh my God, I'm just pouring out of my brain is very, very, I love it.
And without, I mean, it seems like even though you weren't finding a whole lot of success, you and Dave weren't at the time, I mean, eventually you would. Like you wrote and starred and directed a film called The Oath that was your work. And so that probably couldn't have happened if that period didn't happen earlier in your career.
100%. 100%. By us like basically recommitting to it and spending hours and hours and hours writing Let's Get Osama, writing, these other movies that didn't get sold. Eventually one day, maybe a year and a half in, we sold one. We sold Central Intelligence, which ended up becoming a real movie with Dwayne Johnson and Kevin Hart. And from that moment on, we were like, okay, we are writers now. That's it. Writers first. And it was, I think, because of that, we got access to the next level, right? You sell your movie and then you get to go. The first test, they invite you in to make sure you're not crazy, right? And you sell something, you sell a movie, and you've passed the he's not crazy test because they've given you money and you've delivered a product and it's been fine. Then you get access to the next level, which is like, oh, wow, we're going to be able to maybe sell a pitch or take someone else's pitch and write it and stuff. And just by spending, another couple years doing that and really just writing and writing and writing and writing, when the time came to get a job with Mindy Kaling as writers, we were like ready to go. And that was, I think, the next thing that kind of, as a writer, got us to the next access to the next level.
Yeah, because you, when you were brought on to that show, the Mindy Project, I mean, initially you guys were brought on as writers, right? You and Dave.
Yes. Yeah.
And I guess your role was to be there to be on set all day and to rewrite and write like bits on set.
Yeah, they hired us as writers together. I think story editors is what our title was. We spent those first 3-4 months in the writer's room with all like hardcore TV writers, like Mindy Kaling, and like Matt Warburton, who was basically running The Simpsons, and like a lot of like Harvard folks who have just been SNL writers for years, just like people who have spent hundreds of, if not thousands of hours in a room. And we loved it. Like we really, really learned a lot watching like the Mindy Kaling system, which is kind of like a version of the Greg Daniels system of story breaking and season breaking and character breaking, and kind of seeing how they do that. And kind of, that's just so much fun. Being in a room with a bunch of other funny people pitching funny bits, so much fun. And, around that time, Mindy, she early on was like, oh, you should be on the show because you're a funny actor. And I thought I would end up being like a guy who shows up every 3 or 4 episodes, like a janitor or something. And then one day she kind of handed me this monologue for Morgan and was like, if you read this and you like it, we should just go and put you on tape. And we told the network you're doing it, but we just want to put you on tape and show them.
Wow.
And so I finally passed the network test because of Mindy, because Mindy was like,
wow,
you have to hire him. And by me being on set a little bit, and part of their theory is when you write an episode of TV, it's not like you just write it and hand it to the showrunner and you start the next episode. Like they want you to produce that episode. They want you to, write it by yourself, then come in with a room and rewrite it and help lead the rewrite and go to the production meetings and be on set. And I just think because Dave and I are like, whatever, affable Midwest guys who are comfortable around like, crew, and there's 2 of us, she thought it would be helpful to the show for us to be on kind of the on-set writers for the next 6 years, basically. And that was amazing because that really gave me like I knew everything about running a TV show after that. Like I just saw every
just working in that
thing.
in that process, in that system that she set up.
Yes, you just learn because you get all the writer's side of it. You get to see how the stories become stories and how they change and how you throw them out and start over. But being on the floor and seeing how like actual like TV is made was fascinating. It took me like it blew me away. And now, like I said, like when I go on to like if you needed me, if I got a phone call, God, I don't know, Abbott Elementary, the director's sick, can you come and direct? I could walk onto that set right tomorrow morning.
Wow.
And just be like, got
wow.
it. Just because we spent hundreds and hundreds of hours there, and just
yeah.
I just think it's listening to people. It's knowing when to, to lean on people and to trust like, the team leaders and stuff, and just communicating. Like that was a big thing. Whenever there's a bad set, it's always just bad communication.
How did you know, and how do you know now when something is funny? I mean, there's some sketches I watch a lot of Mad TV, reading about you, and there's some sketches that just don't land. They're not that funny, right? And
yes.
And I imagine the threshold on the Mindy Project was just much, much higher, just incomparably higher for what would be acceptable to the writers, right? And so, like, how do you know when you're writing something and you're in a writer's room or you're working with other writers that it's good enough?
Um, Comedy is I think the only type of genre where you can kind of instantly gauge if it's effective, right? If you're in the writer's room and I pitched a line for Mindy that just got a huge laugh, unless it really bumps the story, it's probably going to end up in the show. So you already got a pretty good idea that it made these, whatever, 12 people laugh. And then I think it's a pretty good gauge to the next level is the table read. You know, how does that play at the table read? How does that play on the floor? Are the crew members laughing? If the crew members are laughing, like there's this a great feeling you get sometimes where it's like you're almost worried the crew is going to mess up the take because they're laughing, but you know they won't because they're a good crew, which is like the best feeling because like you know it is funny. Now, there have been times where all those three hurdles have happened and they've been funny, and then it doesn't necessarily look great on TV, but that's who cares. But I think you do just get this built-in barometer with comedy. And yeah, and conversely, it's just like if a bit is dying, if it's a bit that no one laughs at, but for some reason you need to get it in story, and the table read doesn't get a laugh, but you still keep it in and it makes it all the way to the episode, it will probably be bad in the episode. You know what I mean? Maybe it still serves a purpose, but that's the thing. You just don't get that with drama. You know, it's not like someone like in a drama room pitches like a line and everyone's like, oh, that was really dramatic. You know what I mean? Like I think you just with comedy, you can just gauge from people's instant reactions.
And I mean, you mentioned like being part of that show, like having worked as a writer for a few years and having some success, but not as much as you'd hope, but then getting on the Mindy Project and learning all the aspects of how everything works. Presumably, you couldn't have written and directed and starred in your own film without that experience.
100% no. Like it allowed me to, for the first time, even though I had been on Mad TV, it's a late night sketch show is a little bit different. Like a late night sketch show is it's its own thing. But to kind of just get to see how it works and be part of it, it was. And then also on, every summer I would do a movie, right? I would go off and do whatever, Neighbors or Sisters or something. And working with guys like, Nick Stoller and kind of seeing how they are on set, it just gave me the confidence that I was like, oh yeah, I could write and direct a movie. Like I can do that. And so, yeah, without the Mindy of it all, like nothing else happens. There's no The Oath. There's no whatever history of the world. There's just me as a guy who's in a writer's room that you're like, was he on Mad TV?
Tell me about, one of the greatest comedy films, certainly of all times, up there, certainly the top 50, Mel Brooks' History of the World Part 1.
Oh, yes.
You are in History of the World Part 2. Mel Brooks
Yes.
involved with that, of course. Nick Kroll and others are in that. I think one of the characters you play for sure is Leon Trotsky.
Yes.
Did you have any interaction or much interaction with Mel Brooks?
Yeah, this is, a year and a half ago, probably. Dave Stassen and I were kind of in between a couple different things. And Nick Kroll, who's I've known for a long time, he's another guy that performing with him, I remember I went on The League years ago and we had so much fun going back and forth. We've always loved performing with each other. He reached out and said, hey, we are trying to figure this out. It's Mel, it's History of the World Part 2, it's me, it's Wanda. And I've seen that movie 100 times. Like I've seen it so much. And when he called us, like Dave and I right away got very, very excited because we saw like the possibilities of what a show could be. And I'm a history fanatic. Like all I read about, it's every podcast I listen to. I'm obsessed with history. And so we spent a long time with Nick and Wanda kind of breaking the show. But the first thing we needed was approval from Mel. And, the thought of even like meeting Mel Brooks in my life is like, dream of dreams, won't happen. Now we have to like we have to meet him and he has to like us. You know what I mean? So I remember we went on, like, we met him on a Zoom because obviously it's COVID and we didn't want to, go to his house and rattle him. But we had like a really nice long Zoom meeting. And I just mentioned Carl Reiner, and he just kind of launched into these stories about Carl Reiner and the writer's room in your show of shows, and how Neil Simon was kind of shy when he would pitch. So he would have to, whisper his pitches to Carl. And it was just like you could not have asked for like a better Mel Brooks experience. And he liked me.
Mm.
And then, every few weeks we would check in with Mel and, pitch him kind of, hey, we want to do the Russian Revolution. And we kind of think it would be, like this. And God bless him, like, could not be more supportive. Definitely had like his, bunch of jokes. He was like, you got to make sure when Robert E. Lee, when he shows up and his men are there, I want this joke. And so he was very like hands-on as much as he could be, which was just like incredible. Like the 96-year-old man giving you like comedy pitches that are hilarious. It was an absolute dream come true. And you always get nervous when something that is kind of an existing IP comes out, because people have a lot of connections to it and they have their feelings about it. And, I really hope people love it. We're so happy with it. We think it's so funny. We think it really is an accurate version of like what a TV version of the movie could be. We would always be like, whenever we would get blocked creatively, we'd just be like, oh, just go back to the movie. Like, this is, you know what I mean? Just go back to the source, because it's such a great source. So I hope people like it.
Hey, it's Guy, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation. For more like it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And for the audio version, just open up your favorite podcast app, search for The Great Creators, and tap follow.